The story opens in a land where jagged mountains cut the horizon and the Aegean sparkles with promise. Ancient Greece is not a single kingdom, but a patchwork of rival city-states. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, each burning with pride, jealousy, and ambition. The air hums with myth and mystery. Gods are said to walk among mortals. Oracles whisper futures in riddles, and heroes claim divine bloodlines to legitimize their power. In Athens, new ideas begin to stir. Farmers and merchants grumble against aristocrats who hoard wealth and power. They demand a system where their voices matter. The seeds of democracy are planted, not as a noble experiment, but as a desperate bargain to keep the restless masses from revolt. Athenian leaders cloak this compromise in ideals, but behind closed doors they argue, is this bold step a gift of freedom or a clever leash disguised as liberty? Meanwhile, philosophy sparks like wildfire. Thinkers gather in shaded courtyards, daring to question not only politics, but the very order of the universe. Yet their words are dangerous. The powerful fear that too many questions could unravel traditions, expose corruption, and even offend the gods themselves. Already whispers spread of one day putting such thinkers on trial to silence them. And across the seas, rivals watch. Sparta sharpens its spears, Corinth counts its silver, and Persia, vast and relentless, looms like a storm on the horizon. Greece may be birthing ideas that will echo through eternity, but it is also sowing seeds of jealousy, betrayal, and war. The rise of Greece is dazzling, yet from the very beginning, its brilliance carries shadows. Democracy is born from unrest, philosophy from doubt, and unity from rivalry. Even as the marble temples rise, so too does the sense that every victory hides a flaw waiting to crack. No story of Greece can unfold without its two titans, Athens and Sparta. They were like fire and ice, one fueled by ideas, the other by discipline. To the world, they looked like opposites. To each other, they were destined rivals. Athens glowed with art, democracy, and philosophy. Its people debated politics in the agora, celebrated plays in the theater, and worshipped wisdom as much as the gods. But behind the polished marble was ambition. Athens was hungry for power, eager to turn its cultural glow into political dominance. Sparta, by contrast, was forged in iron. Every citizen was raised for war. Children were tested for strength at birth, boys hardened in brutal training camps, and women bred to produce warriors. To Spartans, freedom was not found in debates, but in discipline and in obedience to the state. Their government feared change, distrusted new ideas, and guarded its way of life with unyielding ferocity. Yet fate twisted them together. When Persia threatened to crush Greece, Athens and Sparta set aside their hatred to fight as uneasy allies. The world saw unity, but beneath the surface were simmering suspicions. Athens mocked Spartan brutality. Sparta despised Athenian arrogance. Victory against Persia only fanned their rivalry. As Athens built its Delian League for protection, it slowly turned allies into subjects, extracting tribute under the guise of friendship. Sparta, watching from the shadows, saw through the mask. To them, Athens was no better than Persia, another empire rising in democratic disguise. The twist is clear. Athens and Sparta were not enemies by fate, but by mirror. Each saw in the other what it feared most. Athens saw Sparta as a warning of what unchecked power could become, and Sparta saw Athens as proof that freedom leads to chaos. They needed each other, yet could never coexist. This tension was not just rivalry. It was the slow fuse of a war that would one day shatter Greece itself. From the east, a shadow rose, an empire so vast it stretched across deserts, mountains, and seas. Persia. To the Greeks, Persia was the monster in every nightmare, an unstoppable force demanding submission. When Persian messengers came, asking for earth and water as tokens of loyalty, some Greek states surrendered. But Athens and Sparta refused. Their defiance was the spark that would ignite one of history's most dramatic struggles. The Persian king, Darius, sought to crush Athens for its insolence. At Marathon, the Athenians faced an army that dwarfed them in size. Victory seemed impossible until cunning strategy and sheer desperation turned the tide. The Persians retreated, but the Greeks knew this was only the beginning. Years later, Darius's son, Xerxes, returned with an army so massive it was said to drink rivers dry. This time, Greece had no choice but to unite. Sparta's king Leonidas led his 300 warriors at Thermopylae, holding the narrow pass against overwhelming odds. Their sacrifice became legend, but it was also a delay, a gamble to buy time for Athens to rally the fleet. At Salamis, the Athenians lured the Persian navy into narrow straits, where their smaller, faster ships struck like daggers. It was a stunning victory, one that turned the tide of the war and saved Greece. For the first time, the fractured city-states had acted as one and triumphed. But unity is fragile. Even as Persians retreated, Greeks whispered suspicions. Some accused fellow states of betrayal during the war. Others feared Athens had grown too powerful with its navy. What had been a fight for freedom now became a struggle for dominance. The twist? The Persian threat did not destroy Greece. It made Greece stronger, but only long enough to expose the fractures beneath. By defeating Persia, Athens gained glory and power, but also envy and resentment. Sparta, humiliated by its losses and overshadowed by Athens' rising influence, would not forgive easily. The Persian Wars gave Greece heroes, legends, and pride, but also sowed the seeds of civil war. The greatest danger was no longer Persia. It was Greece itself. Athens emerged from the Persian Wars, not just as a survivor, but as a star. Its fleet ruled the Aegean, its allies poured tribute into its coffers, and its leaders boasted that Athens had saved Greece, and therefore deserved to lead it. Out of this confidence rose an era so dazzling that historians would later call it a golden age. Marble temples crowned the Acropolis, with the Parthenon standing as a monument to both art and ambition. Sculptors carved gods so lifelike they seemed ready to breathe, while playwrights filled theaters with tragedies that bared the human soul. In the Agora, citizens debated laws, philosophers posed riddles about truth, justice, and the very nature of existence. Democracy was alive, vibrant, and intoxicating. But beneath the brilliance lay darker truths. The tribute that funded Athens' splendor was extracted from allies who had little choice but to obey. Those who resisted were crushed, their cities burned, their people enslaved. Athens' democracy, so celebrated, was limited only to free male citizens, while women, slaves, and foreigners remained invisible, bound to the shadows of society. Even among citizens, freedom was fragile. The same democracy that allowed voices to be heard could turn swiftly into a mob, silencing anyone who challenged its pride. The fate of Socrates would one day prove how dangerous free thought could be in a city that worshipped its own ideals. And Sparta watched. From across the Peloponnesus, the austere warriors sneered at Athens' pride. To them, the Golden Age was nothing but arrogance draped in marble. Where Athens saw art, Sparta saw weakness. Where Athens boasted of democracy, Sparta saw chaos. The twist, the golden age of Athens, was not just an era of progress, it was also an illusion, a mask hiding exploitation and control. Athens had won freedom from Persia, only to become an empire itself. The seeds of its downfall were already planted in the very foundations of its greatness. Glory had come to Greece, but glory always comes at a cost. The Golden Age could not last. Athens and Sparta, two titans born from the same land yet molded by different visions, were bound to collide. Their rivalry, simmering for decades, finally erupted into a war that would drag the entire Greek world into chaos. At first, Athens held the advantage. Its navy controlled the seas, its empire brought endless wealth, and its walls made the city nearly impossible to conquer. Sparta, landlocked and suspicious of the sea, relied on its legendary warriors. For years, the war swung back and forth, sieges, raids, betrayals, and uneasy truces that never held. But war is never clean. A plague swept through Athens, striking down tens of thousands, including its brilliant leader Pericles. Panic and anger turned democracy into instability as demagogues rose, promising victory through reckless gambles. Athens began to devour itself from the inside. Sparta, meanwhile, played a patient game. Though battered, it forged an unlikely alliance with Persia, the very empire Greece had once united to defeat. Gold from the east built Spartan ships, and soon the seas no longer belonged to Athens alone. The war's twists grew darker. Allies switched sides. Cities that had once trusted Athens revolted, sick of its tribute demands and cruelty. Athens struck back with brutal force, burning villages and enslaving entire populations, proving that the champion of freedom had become as ruthless as any tyrant. In the end, Sparta's persistence and Persian gold turned the tide. Athens' proud navy was shattered, its empire crumbled, and the city surrendered. For the first time in generations, Athens, the jewel of Greece, was forced to bow. The twist? The war was not just Sparta's victory or Athens' defeat. It was Greece's tragedy. Both sides emerged scarred, their strength drained. In trying to destroy each other, they had weakened themselves so much that new threats loomed on the horizon. The Greeks had won freedom from Persia only to lose it to their own endless rivalry. The Peloponnesian War was not just a battle of swords, but of ideals: democracy versus discipline, freedom versus order, and in the end, both bled to death on the same battlefield. The Peloponnesian War left Athens shaken, its empire shattered, its pride wounded. The city that once saw itself as the beacon of freedom was now bitter, paranoid, and searching for someone to blame. In this tense atmosphere, one man's voice became both a light of reason and a target. That man was Socrates, the philosopher who had spent his life wandering the agora, questioning everyone from generals to craftsmen. His weapon was not the sword, but the question. What is justice? What is truth? What is virtue? He exposed hypocrisy, challenged assumptions, and demanded that people look deeper than tradition or pride. But in a city wounded by defeat, his questions felt dangerous. Athens wanted unity, not doubt. Leaders whispered that Socrates was corrupting the youth, planting rebellion in young minds. Some accused him of impiety, of disrespecting the gods that protected the city. Others simply feared that his relentless questioning would unravel the fragile order holding Athens together. The trial was a spectacle. In the court, Socrates refused to flatter or beg for mercy. He spoke with defiance, insisting that he was a gadfly sent by the gods to sting Athens into self-reflection. His words were brilliant, but also defiant. Too defiant. The jury, swayed by fear and anger, condemned him to death. Given the chance to flee into exile, Socrates refused. To him, escaping would betray the very laws he had lived under, even if those laws betrayed him. Calmly, he drank the cup of hemlock poison, surrounded by weeping students. His death marked not just the end of a man, but a turning point in Athens itself. The twist? The city that prided itself on democracy and free speech had killed its greatest thinker in the name of preserving order. In silencing Socrates, Athens revealed its own hypocrisy, that democracy too could become tyranny when ruled by fear. Yet Socrates' death was not the end. His students, Plato and later Aristotle, would take his ideas and transform them into philosophies that would echo for millennia. By trying to destroy him, Athens had only made him immortal. While Athens and Sparta bled themselves dry with endless rivalries, a new power rose in the north, Macedonia. Its king, Philip II, transformed his army into an unstoppable machine, and his son, educated by none other than Aristotle, would take that power and carve his name into history. His name was Alexander. From boyhood, Alexander was fed both steel and ideas. On one hand, his father trained him in strategy, discipline, and war. On the other, Aristotle filled his mind with philosophy, science, and the belief that knowledge was the truest form of power. This fusion made Alexander more than a warrior. It made him a visionary who saw empire not just as conquest, but as destiny. When Philip was assassinated, Alexander seized the throne. The Greek city-states, exhausted by war, thought they could break free. Instead, Alexander crushed their rebellions with terrifying speed, burning Thebes to ash as a warning that resistance would be met with fire. Athens, shaken, submitted. Greece was united at last, not by democracy or ideals, but under the iron fist of a Macedonian king. But Alexander's ambition stretched far beyond Greece. He set his sights east, against the mighty Persian Empire. What began as revenge for past invasions became something far greater, a campaign of conquest across continents. From Asia Minor to Egypt, from Persia to India, Alexander's armies marched, leaving behind both ruins and cities bearing his name. The twist: Alexander carried Aristotle's lessons with him, but bent them to his own will. He spoke of spreading Greek culture, language, and philosophy across the known world, what he called the vision of a universal empire. Yet his march was also fueled by bloodshed, ambition, and ruthless power. Was he a philosopher king, the very dream Plato once imagined? Or was he the nightmare, a tyrant using philosophy as a mask for domination? By the time Alexander died at just 32, his empire stretched farther than any before him. But it was also fragile, built on conquest, not cohesion. His death would shatter it into fragments, leaving his generals to carve it apart. And yet, his legacy endured. Greek thought, art, and philosophy now stretched from the Mediterranean to India. The Hellenistic world was born, a strange fusion of wisdom and war, beauty and brutality. Alexander had not just conquered with the sword, he had conquered with ideas. And in doing so, he ensured that Greece's influence would outlive Greece itself. While Athens and Sparta bled themselves dry with endless rivalries, a new power rose in the north, Macedonia. Its kin, Philip II, transformed his army into an unstoppable machine, and his son, educated by none other than Aristotle, would take that power and carve his name into history. His name was Alexander. From boyhood, Alexander was fed both steel and ideas. On one hand, his father trained him in strategy, discipline, and war. On the other, Aristotle filled his mind with philosophy, science, and the belief that knowledge was the truest form of power. This fusion made Alexander more than a warrior. It made him a visionary who saw empire not just as conquest, but as destiny. When Philip was assassinated, Alexander seized the throne. The Greek city-states, exhausted by war, thought they could break free. Instead, Alexander crushed their rebellions with terrifying speed, burning Thebes to ash as a warning that resistance would be met with fire. Athens, shaken, submitted. Greece was united at last, not by democracy or ideals, but under the iron fist of a Macedonian king. But Alexander's ambitions stretched far beyond Greece. He set his sights east against the mighty Persian Empire. What began as revenge for past invasions became something far greater, a campaign of conquest across continents. From Asia Minor to Egypt, from Persia to India, Alexander's armies marched, leaving behind both ruins and cities bearing his name. The twist? Alexander carried Aristotle's lessons with him, but bent them to his own will. He spoke of spreading Greek culture, language, and philosophy across the known world, what he called the vision of a universal empire. Yet his march was also fueled by bloodshed, ambition, and ruthless power. Was he a philosopher king, the very dream Plato once imagined, or was he the nightmare, a tyrant using philosophy as a mask for domination? By the time Alexander died at just 32, his empire stretched farther than any before him. But it was also fragile, built on conquest, not cohesion. His death would shatter it into fragments, leaving his generals to carve it apart. And yet, his legacy endured. Greek thought, art, and philosophy now stretched from the Mediterranean to India. The Hellenistic world was born, a strange fusion of wisdom and war, beauty and brutality. Alexander had not just conquered with the sword, he had conquered with ideas. And in doing so, he ensured that Greece's influence would outlive Greece itself. When Alexander the Great died unexpectedly in Babylon at the age of 32, he left behind no clear heir, only an empire so vast it was impossible to rule. His generals, the Diadochi, successors, quickly turned from allies to rivals, tearing his empire into pieces. What should have been a monument to unity became a chessboard of betrayal, shifting alliances, and endless wars. Polites seized Egypt, founding a dynasty that would rule for centuries. Seleucus claimed Persia and stretched eastward. Antigonus fought for Greece and Macedonia itself. Each man believed he carried Alexander's legacy, but in truth, they betrayed it with every battle. His dream of a universal empire fractured into rival kingdoms locked in constant struggle. And yet, amid the bloodshed, something remarkable happened. The world became stitched together in ways it never had before. Greek culture spread like wildfire. Philosophy, science, art, and language mingled with Egyptian rituals, Persian traditions, and Babylonian astronomy. The city of Alexandria in Egypt rose as the new jewel of the Mediterranean, its great library striving to collect all human knowledge while scholars debated the very nature of the cosmos. This era birthed giants of thought. Euclid laid down the foundations of geometry. Archimedes unlocked the secrets of levers, pulleys, and mathematics. Physicians like Herophilus dissected the human body to understand life itself. It was an age where Greek rationalism met Eastern mysticism, creating a fusion of wisdom that transcended borders. But the twist lay in the contradiction. The Hellenistic kingdoms were born from violence, yet they produced unprecedented cultural flourishing. while rulers squabbled for land, ordinary people lived in a world richer, more connected, and more curious than ever before. Trade routes stretched across continents, ideas flowed as freely as goods, and Greek became the language that tied it all together. The shadow, however, never left. Beneath the brilliance of science and art, the instability of the fractured kingdoms loomed. Each new war chipped away at the foundations Alexander had built, and from the west, a new power was watching closely, patiently waiting to rise. The irony: Alexander's empire fell apart almost instantly, but his vision of a connected world endured far longer than his conquests. In chaos, he had planted the seeds of a cultural revolution that would shape civilizations for centuries. By the time the Hellenistic kingdoms exhausted themselves in endless wars, a new power had risen in the West: Rome. At first, Rome admired Greece from afar, borrowing its gods, mimicking its art, and sending its youth to study Greek philosophy. But admiration soon turned to conquest. Piece by piece, Rome absorbed the fractured Greek states. Corinth was burned, Athens humbled, and the proud independence of Greece was gone. Yet, in a strange twist, even as Rome crushed Greece politically, it submitted culturally. Roman generals returned home not just with loot, but with Greek tutors, sculptors, and philosophers. To be educated in Rome meant to learn the language and wisdom of Greece. This paradox gave birth to a haunting truth. Greece lost its freedom, but became immortal. Its democracy, though flawed and short-lived, inspired the very frameworks of modern republics. Its tragedies and comedies still echo in theaters today. Its philosophers, from Socrates to Aristotle, planted seeds that grew into the very roots of Western science, politics, and ethics. But the twist is sharper still. The Greeks themselves may have never imagined how their ideas would be used. Plato's warnings about mob rule became justification for emperors. Aristotle's observations on nature were twisted to fit dogma for centuries. Even democracy, reborn in modern times, often carried the same dangers that had condemned Socrates: the power of the majority to silence dissent. And yet, through all the betrayals, the wars, and the contradictions, one truth survived: Greece's ideas outlived its empire. Rome's legions turned to dust, emperors faded from memory, but the whispers of Greek thinkers still guide the modern world. In losing everything, Greece gained eternity. The final irony: Greece, once a small collection of squabbling city-states, became the silent ruler of history, not through armies or wealth, but through ideas so powerful that no conqueror could erase them. The birthplace of democracy and philosophy may have fallen, but its voice still speaks, shaping the destiny of civilizations long after its marble temples crumbled.